Yeah. So we'll start the session. Good evening. I would like to welcome all of you to this special session in honor of Dr. Subir Gokarn, former Executive Director, IMF for India, Bangladesh, Bhutan and Sri Lanka, former Deputy Governor, the Reserve Bank of India, and former faculty IGADR. On this occasion, it's my pleasure to welcome the chief guests of this session, Dr. Duvuri Subbarao, former Governor of the Reserve Bank of India. And I would like also to welcome our speakers in this session, Mr. T.N. Nainan, former editor, Business Standard, Dr. Nalin Kishore, a natural resource economist and consultant, the World Bank, Mr. D.K. Joshi, Chief Economist, CRISIL, and my colleagues, Dr. Rajendra Vaidya, Dr. A. Ganesh Kumar, and Dr. Jayati Sarkar. During the special session, the top 3 papers of this 19th Macroeconomics and Finance Conference will be awarded the Dr. Subir Gokarn Best Paper Awards, as well as microsite dedicated to Dr. Gokarn's policy writings and work at IGADR will be launched. So it is for the very first time that Best Paper prizes are being instituted in our flagship conferences. And given Dr. Gokarn's close association with different activities of the Institute, including the macroeconomics and finance conferences in the past, throughout his distinguished career, we thought that this special session would be the best way to commemorate his contribution to economic policy and research. So I would like to thank the present governor, Dr. Shaktikant Das, chairman of IGADR Board of Management, for readily supporting this initiative. The Best Paper Awards are being sponsored by Dr. Josna R. Bapat, spouse of Dr. Subir Gokarn and the Gokarn family, and co-sponsored by TVS Capital Funds Limited. We thank Dr. Josna Bapat and the Gokarn family and Mr. Gopal Srinivasan, Chairman and Managing Director, TVS Capital Funds Limited, for their sponsorship of these awards. I would also like to thank Subir's close friends, Dr. Nalin Kishore, Dr. Nirmal Mohanty, Mr. Probir Roy, and Mr. Narendra Singh for their idea of creating a microsite as a tribute to Dr. Gokarn to provide widespread access to his policy writings for students of economics, especially those at the undergraduate level. The institution is happy. The institute is happy to host this microsite to facilitate this noble objective. This was coordinated at our end by colleagues, Dr. A. Ganesh Kumar, Dr. Subrata Sarkar, Dr. Jayati Sarkar, and Mr. Lingaraj Panda, our IT head, and his team. Moving on with the proceedings, may now invite Dr. Rajendra Vaidya, faculty IGADR, to give all of us a glimpse into the professional life and achievements of Dr. Subir Gokarn.
Thank you, Professor Dev. For those of you who did not have the fortune of getting to know Dr. Subir Gokarn personally, let me just in very brief go over his extremely successful career. Dr. Subir V. Gokarn, who was my friend and colleague at IGADR, was born in Mumbai on the 3rd of October 1959, the only child of Nirmala and Vittal Gokarn. After completing his undergraduate studies at St. Xavier's College, University of Bombay, and a master's degree at Delhi School of Economics, Subir moved on to do his PhD in economics at the Case Western Reserve University in Ohio. His doctoral dissertation was on the impact of capital market liberalization on industrial performance in South Korea. His professional career began at IGADR Mumbai in 1991. I was fortunate to get to know him as a dear friend and co-author, and we collaborated on quite a few projects together. During 1997 and 1997-98, he was a Fulbright Fellow at the Economic Growth Center at Yale University. And quite fortunately, at that very time, I was spending a year at Boston University on a Ford Foundation postdoctoral fellowship. I very fondly remember my very frequent trips to New Haven. We returned to IJIDR, and 2 years later, he moved to New Delhi as Chief Economist and IFCI Chair in Industrial Development at the National Council of Applied Economic Research. Subir then moved to Standard & Poor's Asia Pacific and CRISIL in 2002 as Chief Economist, a position he held till 2009. Subir served as the Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank of India between 2009 and 2012, where he oversaw monetary policy, research, financial markets, communications, and deposit insurance. During this time, he was also a member of the governing board of IJIDR. In 2012, he joined Brookings India in New Delhi as Director of Research. He was appointed Executive Director on the board of International Monetary Fund in 2015, representing India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Bhutan on IMF's executive board. He served in this position till his sudden and untimely demise in 2019. He was a prolific columnist for Business Standard in India and a frequent commentator on television. His ability to work effectively across academia, government, and business demonstrated his abiding interest in applying economics to the real world. His career research interests have primarily been in the reforms process and its interrelationship with economic performance. He has addressed these issues from a variety of perspectives, cross-country comparisons with particular focus on East Asia, and at macroeconomic and sector industry levels in the Indian context. His research has resulted in a number of publications, including 2 co-authored books on the performance of East Asian economies and a co-edited book on the structure of Indian industry. The issues he wrote on and researched remain both contentious and relevant even today. I must thank Mr. Janak Nabar, Subir's nephew, who helped in outlining his very brief bio. Thank you. Over to you, Professor Mahendra Dev.
Thank you, Rajendra, for providing a glimpse on Subir's professional life and achievements. As Rajendra mentioned, I would also like to thank Subir's nephew, Mr. Janak Nabar, for putting together a slideshow capturing memorable moments from Subir's life. Now, I would like to introduce Dr. Duvuri Subbarao, our chief guest for this special session. Dr. Subbarao served as Governor of the Reserve Bank of India for 5 years, 2008 to 13, during when he was also the chairman of IJDR's Board of Management. Prior to that, he was Finance Secretary to the Government of India and Secretary to the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. Dr. Subbarao joined the Indian Administrative Service in 1972, topping the highly competitive civil services entry examination in that year. As a career civil servant, he worked in various positions in the state government of Andhra Pradesh and in the federal government of India. He was a lead economist in the World Bank during 1999 to 2004. Dr. Subbarao studied at the IIT in Institute of Technology, Kanpur, the Ohio State University, and at MIT. He was alternate governor for India on the governing boards of both the World Bank and the IMF. As Finance Secretary to Government of India and later as Governor of RBI, he participated in a G20 meeting and the meetings of the Bank for International Settlements. After stepping down as Governor RBI, Dr. Subbarao was a distinguished visiting fellow at the National University of Singapore and most recently at the University of Pennsylvania. So now I would like to invite Dr. Subbarao to speak on Subir's legacy in RBI. Over to you, Dr. Subbarao.
Thank you, Mahendra. Today's event to honor the memory of Subir Gokarn is very special for me. As most of you know, he was my colleague in the RBI, and we went through very turbulent times. The global financial crisis, the Eurozone sovereign debt crisis, rupee tantrums, an extraordinary bout of high and persistent inflation. And all this as the government of the day was getting weaker day by day politically. Through all these turbulent times, Subir gave me extraordinary moral and intellectual support. I've grown to respect him as an economist, value him as a colleague, and trust him as a friend. As Professor Vaidya just showed us, Subir's career straddled a wide variety of fields, institutions, and organizations. He was in the academia, in the IGIDR. He was in think tanks like NCAER and Brookings. He was in market institutions, S&P and CRISIL. He was a columnist for Business Standard. He was at apex policy-making level in the RBI, and he was in an international institution like the IMF. What's common across all these facets of Subir's career is that he excelled everywhere. He made a difference, and he influenced policy. It's unfortunate that it gone away even as the best was ahead of him. I remember the first time I met Subir on a rainy Saturday afternoon in July 2009. The position of Deputy Governor RBI had fallen vacant. Many prominent economists in the country had met me to express their interest in the job. Subir was not one of them. But Nayanan of Business Standard and Shankaracharya both told me that I must look at Subir. So I invited him to come and see me. That was the meeting we had on the Saturday afternoon. I remember very distinctly, it was a holiday, the office was closed, there were just two of us, and it was raining outside. The conversation rolled on for about 2 hours. We talked about the economic situation within the country and around the world. We talked about RBI, we talked about his career and my career, his family and my family. We talked about living in Delhi and living in Mumbai. We even talked about Bollywood. And even halfway through the interview, I realized he was my man for the position of Deputy Governor. I also remember the last time I met him, Urmila and I were visiting Washington. I think it was August 2017. And Josna and Subir were kind enough to invite us for dinner to their house. I was deeply touched that Subir personally cooked the meal for us. Maharashtrian vegetarian meal for me and Konkan seafood for Urmila. And he even presented to me a CD of the complete Big Bang Theory. We spoke a few times after that. The last time we spoke was about 4 months before he passed away. I was in Singapore at that time. Almost the first thing he told me was, Subir, you've fallen off the map. We don't hear or see you anymore. And I told him, Subir, I'm in the academia now. I'm not glued very deeply into Indian economic situation. I feel uncomfortable about weighing in on them. Subir said, Subir, you're being too diffident. I think you should engage on India's macroeconomic issues more frequently and more forcefully. I was deeply touched once again by his concern for me. As I think about Subir today, my thoughts naturally go back to the time we spent together in the RBI. As I said, there were very turbulent times. We had confronted many dilemmas, many challenges. But it also strikes me that many of the challenges and dilemmas we confronted at that time are similar to the dilemmas and challenges that the RBI is confronted today. Just to give one example, exit from the extraordinary easy policy. As I said at that time when I was in the RBI, exiting from easy policy after the crisis is like getting out of a Chakravyuh. Chakravyuh in Mahabharata, it's easy to get in, very difficult to get out. RBI today is in a similar situation. 10 years ago, we were in a similar situation. Look at RBI's dilemma today. They're caught in managing the tension between supporting recovery and containing inflation. Yes, we have a V-shaped recovery, probably clock growth of 9.5% this year. But even if we do that, output this year will barely equal output 2 years ago before the pandemic hit us. And that will still be below what the output would have been in the absence of the crisis. So there is, in some sense, a permanent loss of income. On the other hand, RBI also has to worry about inflation. Inflation has been above the midpoint of the target range. core inflation is very strong. RBI is caught navigating between supporting recovery and combating inflation. 10 years ago, we were in a similar situation. We recovered from the global financial crisis before advanced economies, in fact, even before many emerging markets. But inflation caught up with us, and we had to decide how and when to exit from the easy policy. Just as 2 months ago, as the second wave had abated, and we thought the situation was good for RBI to normalize policy, Omicron had hit us, a fresh bout of uncertainty. It's not clear how Omicron will affect inflation. It's not clear how Omicron will affect growth. There was a similar development at that time, 10 years ago. Just as we thought we were ready for normalizing policy, the Eurozone's sovereign debt crisis hit us. So I can quite imagine Subir today engaging in the exit policy. Take another issue on top of RBI's agenda today about launching a digital rupee, a central bank digital currency. I can very well imagine Subir engaging in on the macroeconomic and monetary policy implications, the risks and the costs and benefits of a digital rupee. Subir made an enormous contribution to the Reserve Bank of India. He left a legacy behind. The only way to measure a person's legacy is to see how much lives on after that person has departed. By that test, Subir made enormous contribution. I want to use this occasion to recount some very significant policy and process and content improvements that Subir brought on into the RBI. The first thing Subir brought was a deep and refined sense of the market. The RBI had outstanding economists, impressive subject matter knowledge, very high professional integrity. Where Subir made a difference was to bring a market sense into that, to calibrating policy. Let me give an example. We know that when inflation goes up, demand for gold goes up. That is textbook economics. That is standard knowledge. But where Subir made a difference was to investigate and tell us, which is a tipping point. How long does inflation have to persist at a high level when it triggers demand for gold? How long does inflation have to subside before demand for gold comes down? Those are the issues on which Subir made a difference. Again, another example. We know that inflation expectations matter. In fact, RBI does, I think, a quarterly survey of inflation expectations. But how are inflation expectations formed? How are they formed in urban areas? How are they formed in rural areas? This is where Subir added value. Subir also used the sense of the market to bring improvements in the content and process of monetary policy formulation. Let me give some examples. When Subir and I went into the RBI, the Reserve Bank was doing half-yearly policy reviews, twice a year, with the result that there was a 6-month gap between one policy review and another. A month after coming into RBI, Subir came to me and said, Subha, this is untenable, that lots of things are happening. Rapid developments are happening in the economy, in India and around the world. RBI switches off, RBI is silent for 6 months. The narrative is being shaped by market, by commentators, by analysts, by economists. We cannot let this happen. So we switched from a half-yearly review to a quarterly review, and that had enormous positive impact. Subir also streamlined policy statements. When he and I went to RBI, many of you might recall, RBI used to put out 2 solid documents before every policy. They were very substantive, very significant, very impressive, but nonetheless, very voluminous, with the result that the core messages were getting lost. Subir said we must shorten it. And we reduced the policy statement to 4 pages, which survives even today. And I recall very many meetings we used to have for the policy, the run-up to the policy in drafting. Subir would bring nuances into it and robust economic rationale. See that everything is consistent, that our walk is consistent with our talk. I can remember very well, one example. We had to say, like, with today's interest rate policy interest rate action, the interest rate is close to neutral rate. Now, should we say the interest rate, the policy interest rate is close to neutral rate, or should we say the policy interest rate is closer to the neutral rate? Now, it's just one letter between close and closer, but that made enormous difference to what we were trying to communicate. I can remember we debated that for about 15-20 minutes, and I'm still impressed with that insights that Subir brought. Subir also came and told me that we must have an analyst conference following every policy. And I said, why should we have an analyst conference? We're having a media conference after the policy we've disseminated, we're doing everything okay. Then he said, no, I think it's important to have an analyst conference calling. I was was not sold on the idea, but I deferred to him. And I realized that it was a very, very value-adding thing. Again, I'll give you one example. In one statement, we said, given the current growth and inflation trends and today's rate action, the likelihood of further rate action by the Reserve Bank of India in the immediate future is quite low. Sure enough, there was a lot of commentary, a lot of analysis on what we meant by that immediate future. And the next day, people were speculating on that. The next day in the analyst conference, that question came up and gave us an opportunity to explain what we meant by immediate future. So these are some of the nuances, some of the finer things that Subir brought to bear on policy making. Third, Subir, like I was quite keen on opening up the RBI, opening up communication channels, demystifying RBI. And Subir reinforced that in many ways. Even before us, there was a tradition in the RBI of a drill of consulting all stakeholders. But we expanded and most streamlined it further. And Subir made a tremendous contribution to that. The fourth thing Subir did was put enormous emphasis on research within the RBI, which is very, 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 very important. He launched a project on structural drivers of inflation. He launched another project on the impact of the rainfall distribution on inflation, not just spatial distribution, but even temporal distribution. In fact, if Subir were around today, I can quite imagine him launching a project on the impact of Instagram on inflation expectations. The final thing that I want to cite by way of Subir's contribution to RBI is that he encouraged young researchers to read, write, and disseminate. And he designed a scheme of incentives for young economists in RBI to read and write economics. I did a lot that young economists can learn from Subir's life and work. In fact, a lot of people come and ask me, sir, how can we become a policy economist? I can understand that aspiration. I can understand that ambition. I can even understand that bewilderment. Not everybody can become an economist in the RBI or the government. Indeed, not everybody might want to become an economist in the government of the RBI. There are very many ways of influencing policy, as Subir's life and work show. So since a lot of young economists are in this audience, I want to cite 5 things that people can learn from Subir's life and career, young economists. The first thing they can learn is to apply economics to real world problems. Of course, to be a policy economist, to be an influential policy economist, you have to be a good economist. You have to know your macro, your micro, your developed economics. But you also have to know that economics is not an exact science. That in applying economics, you have to remember that there are no immutable laws in economics. Just to give an example from physics, which I'm familiar with, laws of physics are immutable. The second law of thermodynamics, for example, which says that heat lost is equal to heat gained, is true across space and time, across the entire universe for all time. But laws of economics, that supply is equal to demand or saving is equal to investment, they're not immutable. So young economists have to know how to apply economics to real world problems. Subir excelled in that. The second thing young economists can learn from Subir's life is understanding real world development, something Professor Vaidya referred to. To give an example, food inflation. Food inflation is up today. Food inflation was up during our time. And every month when the inflation number comes up, analysts and economists say inflation, food inflation has gone up, because price of oil has gone up, price of diesel has come down, whatever, all that analysis. But drill down further. Why has food inflation gone up? And Subir used to apply his mind to those issues. In fact, Subir's legacy will live for a long, long time, indeed forever, for understanding the dynamics of food inflation. He was the first economist within the RBI or outside to talk about protein inflation, to understand that the food inflation that we were having is because of protein inflation. And that itself is an outcome of people's incomes going up. As incomes go up, people shift their dietary habits from protein to, from cereals to protein. Subir was the first economist to say that. In fact, I mentioned to Dr. Manmohan Singh, who always used to be troubled by the economic situation. I once told him, sir, inflation that we're having today is a problem of success in some sense, that incomes have gone up. In fact, I would encourage young economists today to read Subir's speech on the price of protein. I think he gave that speech in IGIDR, actually, sometime in October 2011 or some, I don't remember, but it's on the RBI website. The third thing young economists can learn from Subir is to keep their eyes and ears open. You know, you learn things at unanticipated moments from unanticipated people, from stray comments, from a conversation that you're not actually focused on learning, but you learn. Pick up a lot of things. Subir was very good at this. I mentioned this before. He once called a meeting of RBI chair professors. We have, I think, about 10 of them across the country. And he came and told me, Subir, I think you should come and chair that meeting. So I tried to beg off, saying that, look, I'm busy and I've got other things. And, next time I'll come, can you handle this? I could see from the glint in his eye, his disapproval of that. So I went for the meeting anyway, and it was such a rewarding learning experience. So Subir was very good at that, in learning, in keeping his mind open. The fourth thing Subir was good, and this is very clear, was at communicating economics at all levels, at professional level, at journalistic level. I once heard him talk about inflation to class 10 students in a high school. So the test that young economists should ask themselves is, can I explain this to my mother? And Subir was very good at that. The final thing Subir, young economists can learn from Subir is to be a good economist, you have to be a Renaissance man. It's important to specialize, it's important to super specialize, but it's also important to have a breadth of knowledge beyond economics. And Subir had enormous breadth of knowledge beyond economics. People tend to develop tunnel visions, and I think that's something to be shunned. I need hardly tell you that it's some 10 years ago, the Nobel Prize in Economics went for a psychologist, Daniel Kahneman. So it's very important for economists to keep their eyes and ears open to have a breadth of knowledge. So to conclude, Subir's legacy in the RBI lives on. He made enormous contribution, not only to the RBI, but to macroeconomic management in the country. Young people aspiring to be policy economists can learn a lot from Subir's life and work. I'll always remember him as a sharp macroeconomist and as a warm human being. To Josna, I must say you must be proud of your husband. To Kanak, I want to say you must be proud of your father. And I want to compliment IGIDR for organizing this event to celebrate Subir's enormous contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Subbarao, for your insights on Subir's legacy in RBI. As you know, Subir was a regular columnist in the Business Standard, which was being edited by Mr. T.N. Nayan at that time. Mr. Nayan, through his good offices with the Business Standard, has facilitated the development of the IJDR microsite, where a selection of Subir's media writings are being hosted. Now I invite Mr. Nayan to speak on Subir as a columnist.
Thank you, Dr. Mahendra Dev. I hope I'm audible.
Yeah, you are audible.
Thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this event commemorating Subir's life and writings and contributions to economics and economic policy. I will speak briefly on Subir's engagement with the Business Standard. I first met him at, I think, the first Nimrana conference, which the NCAR had jointly organized. And shortly after that, we get the paper, TCA Srinivasaraghavan suggested giving him a fortnightly column because TCA was running the edit page at that time. And he said, why don't we give Subir Gokarn a fortnightly column? And I thought it was a good idea. And then he was invited to start writing his column. One of my convictions at the paper as a journalist was that journalists don't know enough. We preach to the world, we tell the government and the Reserve Bank and others what to do and what not to do. And unlike a general newspaper, in a business newspaper, our readers are often, if not usually, better informed than we are. So I felt the need very strongly to bring in real knowledge at a different level into the paper's deliberations before we actually commented on issues. And so we had a Monday morning's Brains Trust where people who were economists, foreign policy experts, and others would come in and spend a couple of hours just shooting the breeze, sometimes just gossiping about politics or discussing cricket. And we invited Subir to be a part of that Monday morning Brains Trust at the Business Standard office. And Subir used to come straight from the Habitat Center where he had gone to the gym or had a swim. And so he would walk in with the large box of cookies that he'd brought at the Habitat Center. And there were lots of biscuit champions in the office, so those cookies disappeared very quickly. So he was always doubly welcome because of that. And then he had another role in the paper, which was a third role, which was to write the editorials. There was a long phase when he was actually the secret author of most of our editorials on economic policy. And he didn't particularly care what he was saying, because he said, I'm a keyboard on hire for this. So whatever the group had discussed and thought we should say, he would just bang it out in, very quickly in half an hour or 45 minutes. And it was clean prose. It was simply written the way it should be in a newspaper, and it had a clear set of ideas that he put forward. So he was of great value for his contributions at the Monday meetings, which were very sensible. He had a dry wit, and his editorials and his column itself. So at an earlier meeting, shortly after he passed away, I had read out to the group at that time, and this was at the NCAR in Delhi, a really witty column which on dogs, which he'd written once. Today, I want to focus on a somewhat more substantial issue. He wrote a column once, basically saying, "You can't kill two birds, ... And I refer to this because of our immediate events to do with economic reform. And Subir's column basically focused on the idea which was put forward by Jan Tinbergen, that you can't take one policy instrument and serve multiple objectives, that for each objective you need a policy instrument. And the point that Subir made was that if you want to use the procurement mechanism and the support price mechanism to do something in agriculture, you are giving a double guarantee if you both guarantee offtake as well as guarantee the price. And you can't do that. For each policy objective, you need a separate purpose. And when you look at what has happened to the agricultural reform, marketing reform laws that have now been repealed, this is very relevant, because on the one hand, you want to offer an income support, and on the other, you want to have some offtake to feed the public distribution system. So you need two instruments for that. One is income support and one is procurement. And you can't have unlimited procurement as well as a guaranteed price. And this applies equally well to the labor reform program, that when you do labor reform, you want a flexible labor market, but you also want some kind of safety net. And you can't do both with the same reform by saying we're opening up the market. You need some kind of safety net, which is separate reform from offering a flexible labor market. So it was this kind of insight that he brought to his columns, which were particularly useful right through the period that he wrote for us. Of course, we became a friend. In his last visit to our office on a Monday morning, he happened to be in Delhi. He'd come from Washington and the IMF for some discussions, and he'd lost a lot of weight. He was clearly unwell, but he was, dismissed all concern by simply saying, "I've got over it. I'm well and fine, and don't worry," and went off. And then, of course, shortly afterwards, he was no more. So I always remember him very warmly. For all the things that he was and for the many things that he did. And I want to thank and compliment IGIDR for the initiative with the support of the Reserve Bank and TBS and others, and Jyotsna's constant efforts to do this prize initiative in Subir's honor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Nainan, for your remarks on Subir as a columnist. Now, I invite Dr. Subbarao to launch the IGIDR microsite on Dr. Subir Gokarn. thank you, Dr. Subbarao, for inaugurating the IGIDR microsite. I now request my colleague, Dr. Ganesh Kumar, to give a tour of the microsite.
Good evening. It's my pleasure to give a virtual tour of the microsite that we have developed at IGIDR in honor of Dr. Subir V. Gokarn. I have here in front of me I've already opened the homepage of IGIDR, www.igidr.ac.in. All you need to do is you have to scroll down this homepage, and here you will see a button which shows Subir Gokarn tribute. So when you click on this button, it takes you to the microsite which has been developed in honor of Dr. Gokarn. The microsite gives you a brief account of Dr. Gokarn's bio, and it highlights some of the selected set of media writings published by Dr. Gokarn in the Business Standard, his academic publications when he was a faculty at IGIDR, and the PhD students whom he supervised while he was at IGIDR. Turning first to the selected media writings, we have provided a brief introduction to the media writings. It gives a background to the very idea of the microsite that we have developed here, and also mentions the team that has worked in developing the microsite. The writings in media have been categorized in different headings, such as business economics, central bank policies, and so on. If you click on any one of them, it will list the various articles that he has published in the Business Standard, and also gives the date of publication of the article. So when you click on any one of them, you will see an abstract of the article and also the link to the original article in the Business Standard itself. So one can access this way, one can access various articles that Dr. Gokarn has published in the Business Standard. So one can choose any topic that one wants and go through and find what is of interest to one person. Turning to the academic publications, Dr. Gokarn has published some books while he was at IGIDR. These are some of his, these are the research papers that he has published in academic journals, the discussion papers, and the project reports that he brought out while he was at IGIDR. And as I mentioned, here we have listed the names of his students, their PhD thesis titles, and also the year that they got their PhD degree while they were at IGIDR. So I hope you enjoy the microsite, which we are dedicating in honor of Dr. Subir Gokarn. Thank you.
Thank you, Ganesh, for the virtual tour of the microsite. I hope the microsite would serve its objectives. I now invite Dr. Nalin Kishore, natural resource economist and consultant, the World Bank, to speak on Dr. Subir Gokarn's policy writings and their significance. He has been one of the initiators and has been part of the team that developed the microsite. Over to Dr. Nalin Kishore.
Thank you, Professor Mahendra Dev. I hope everyone can hear.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you again, and a very warm namaste to all those who joined this special session to honor the memory of Dr. Subir Gokarn. And it is very much my privilege and pleasure to share with you a few details on this initiative that we worked on as a tribute to Subir. I know many thanks have already been given, but I did want to recognize and acknowledge two of my closest partners in crime for this initiative, Narendra Singh and Nirmal Mohanty. We worked very closely together on this, and my remarks today will reflect really the collective thoughts of this group. So it's difficult to say anything more about the the intellectual might that Subir had and carried to discussions. And as has been said again by the previous speakers, he was a very prolific writer. And I'm going to focus a little bit on that prolific writer aspect of Subir. And in that context, even more specifically on the writings that he made to the op-eds that he prepared for Business Standard, very prominent newspaper in India and influential as well, where his op-eds reached out beyond academics and the policymakers to a very wide audience. Between 1997 and 2017, Subir penned about 300 op-eds. And each op-ed reflects his depth of knowledge about the Indian economy. Each is an illustration of how formal economic principles can be used to understand a wide variety of development challenges. And each is written with such compelling clarity and brevity that the Aam Aadmi can easily appreciate the analysis and the proposed solutions that were given there. So given the unique qualities of Subir's op-eds, combined with their analytical rigor and deep economic insights, it became obvious to us as readers that they are not just of historical relevance, but can contribute to a better understanding of today's development challenges. And additionally, again, this has been articulated by Mr. Nenan, for example, that they're models of how to communicate complex ideas in a language which is easily understood by the layperson and the daily reader, the casual reader. So this thinking led very naturally to the idea of making these op-eds accessible to a wider audience in a one-stop shop. And we ended up spending the last about 1 year working together to bring this idea to fruition. And a huge thanks to IGIDR who for their unwavering support for this initiative. So you've, Dr. Ganesh Kumar has already given you a sort of a flavor of, the select media writings tab that he showed a minute ago. I'll go a little bit more into it in the next minute. So on the website, you will now find an initial collection of 96 op-eds. And again, as Dr. Kumar illustrated, we prepared a short abstract for each op-ed that captures the main ideas of that piece. They've been organized into 13 categories, ranging from central banking policies to international economics, to macroeconomics and business cycles, to public finance and so forth, to facilitate search and research. And going forward, we hope to continue adding more such summaries of Dr. Gokarn's op-eds. So I would invite you to browse these op-eds, and I'm convinced that you'll find them useful as well as really a pleasure to read. Certainly Narendra and Nirmal and I had many an engaged discussion stemming from them when we were reading them. And one of my favorite pieces actually happens to be You Can't Kill Two Birds, that Mr. Nenan just talked about at length. And as economists, we often forget that you need to have at least one instrument for each target that you want to successfully address. And if we don't have at least that many at the minimum, I think we can often land up in trouble. Anyway, so please do take a look at those pieces, and hopefully you'll find them as compelling and as relevant as we do. And just in conclusion, I would like to say that this initiative is a fitting, albeit a modest tribute to the intellectual contributions of Dr. Gokarn, We also think that it will particularly benefit those engaged in critical thinking, research, and policy writing in the Indian economy. And importantly, we see this to be a terrific resource for university students and teachers alike. So thank you very much. And back to you, Dr. Mahendra Dev.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Nalin Kishore, for your speech on Subir's media writings. Subir, in his distinguished career, has taken up multiple roles as an economist. Mr. D.K. Joshi, the chief economist of CRISIL, was Subir's colleague and is one of the original ideators of the Best Paper Awards. I now invite Mr. D.K. Joshi to speak on his reflections on Subir at work as an economist.
I had the good fortune of knowing late Dr. Subir Gokarn for over 2 decades. I would like to talk about 3 very distinct qualities of Subir that have stayed with me all through. These, I believe, make him stand apart as well. First, Subir's intellectual prowess, his ability to connect dots and communicate with clarity is very well known. But if you talk to people who worked with him, they will tell you that this is not the primary reason why they will always remember him and always respect him. His human qualities of large-heartedness and fairness, and also his wisdom and his wit, stays with almost everyone who worked with him. The way he treated his co-workers with utmost respect showed his empathy and his sensitivity. Second, he had a hands-off approach to managing and mentoring his team. He provided guidance and direction, but also gave his team members enough space so that they could develop and tweak their own frameworks. Also, it did not matter where you worked from home or office. As long as you did your job, it was fine. This provided a lot of flexibility to his team members and was very well appreciated. Original work from home, if I may say. Third, he set up the CRISIL Center for Economic Research in 2002. He gave it the intellectual heft to make it a credible, balanced, and respected voice on economic as well as policy issues. He was a very keen observer, and the new ideas for research would often stem from what he observed around him. It could be the state of infrastructure that he observed while going to office every day, or it could be stubble burning or the monsoon rains. One example of this is creation of an index which summarized the impact of deficient monsoons on the agriculture. This was in 2002, which was a very bad monsoon year. He felt the need to add value to the weekly rainfall data which the Met provided. We ended up creating a simple index called DRIP, Deficient Rainfall Impact Parameter, and we still use it every monsoon season to track the impact of deficient rains on different crops and across different states. He gave us so much to remember. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Joshi, for highlighting Subir as an economist. We now come to the much awaited, the Best Paper Awards function. As mentioned earlier, the conference this year introduces the Dr. Subir Gokarn Best Paper Awards in memory of Dr. Gokarn, which will award cash prizes of rupees 1 lakh and a citation, rupees 50,000 and a citation, and rupees 25,000 and a citation to the 3 best winners. Our chief guest, Dr. Subbarao, has graciously agreed to present the awards, which has been chosen by an external jury. We received 152 national and international submissions this year, all of which were subjected to a double-blind peer review process, with 15 papers selected for presentation over the 3 days of the conference. A special awards committee comprising of Dr. Chetan Ghate and Dr. Sushant Malik was set up to choose the best paper awards. Yeah, from the 15 final presentations. From IGIDR, my colleague, Dr. Tanya Ghosh, facilitated the award committee. I will now introduce the awards committee members. Dr. Chetan Ghate is a professor in the Economics and Planning Unit, Indian Statistical Institute, Delhi. His primary research interests are macroeconomics, monetary economics, and growth and development. He holds a PhD in economics from Claremont Graduate University in California. He was awarded the Indian Econometric Society 2014 Mahalanobis Memorial Gold Medal in Economics. He served on the Reserve Bank of India's TACT Technical Advisory Committee for Monetary Policy, as well as the RBI's Monetary Policy Committee. Dr. Sushant Malik is a professor of international finance at the School of Business and Management, Queen Mary University of London. In addition, he has been the co-editor-in-chief of Economic Modeling, a leading journal in economics. He has a PhD in economics from the University of Warwick in the United Kingdom. He has nearly 100 peer-reviewed articles in reputed journals. So the award committee based their decision on 5 criteria. One is motivation. Second is execution. Third, novelty of results with policy relevance. Fourth, quality of writing. And fifth, presentation. So each of these criteria was given equal weight. I want to extend my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Ghate and Dr. Malik for giving their valuable time and being part of the Dr. Subir Gokarn Awards decision-making process. We now come to the announcement of the awards. I request Dr. Subbarao to announce the awards.
Thank you, Professor Mahendra Dev. I'm delighted to do this. The third Best Paper Award goes to Robert Bayer, Tarun Jain, and Sonalika Sinha for the paper Lights Out, COVID Containment Policies and Economic Activity. We congratulate them. Shall we move on?
Yeah.
The second Best Paper Award goes to Arpit Kumar and Parija, Arpit Kumar Parija and Vipul Mathur for their paper Banking Sector Expectations and Financial Stability. And here finally, the first best paper award goes to Oscar Joda, Sanjay Singh, and Alan Taylor for their paper, The Long-Run Effects of Monetary Policy. Thank you. Congratulations to all the winners.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Subbarao, for the virtual presentation of Best Paper Awards. So heartiest congratulations to the awardees and wishing you all the very best in your journey ahead. We now come to the end of the special session, and with it, the conclusion of the 19th Macroeconomics and Finance Conference. I now call my colleague, Dr. Jayati Sarkar, to give the vote of thanks.
Good evening, everyone. Before I give the vote of thanks, I would request all of you to switch on your videos so that we can take some pictures, albeit virtual, but still it would be nice. I'll just tell you when the photo session is over. And then I will start my vote of thanks. Big smile, everyone. We are now adept at these, picture snaps, snapping these pictures. Okay, thank you very much. The photo session is over, and now I can move on to my vote of thanks. Thank you, Professor Dev. And this is my absolute privilege and honor to present the vote of thanks on behalf of the organizing committee of the 19th Macroeconomics and Finance Conference that was virtually held over the last 3 days. This year's conference was in large part very unlike any of the 18 conferences that IGIDR had organized since 1998. This is mainly because of its virtual avatar on account of the ongoing COVID pandemic. The organizing committee had no templates to follow, but at the same time, we wanted the conference to continue to serve its objectives, albeit through a virtual platform, of bringing together scholars from all over the world who are engaged in quality research in macroeconomics and finance, particularly with respect to emerging economies like India. I think and I hope that we have largely met these objectives. Excuse me. We are grateful to an entire spectrum of individuals associated with this conference in different capacities, and we would like to sincerely thank all of them. We are extremely honored that keynote sessions of our conference were graced by academicians and policymakers of great repute, Professor Frederick Mishkin of the Columbia Business School, Professor Hugo Panizza of the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies, and Professor Erwin Subramanian of Brown University. We thank each of them for sparing their valuable time to share with the participants their insights based on cutting-edge research in macroeconomics and finance, particularly in the areas of monetary policy, financial crisis, sovereign debt, and of course, measurement of performance of the Indian economy. The conference this year was even more special because of the closing session on Dr. Subir Gokarn, our beloved former colleague, former Deputy Governor of RBI, and before his sad and untimely demise, Executive Director IMF for India, Bangladesh, Bhutan, and Sri Lanka. We are honored and thankful to Dr. Duvuri Subbarao, former Governor of the Reserve Bank of India, for acting as the chief guest of this session, for sharing his thoughts about Dr. Gokarn, for launching a microsite on his policy writings and academic work at IGIDR, and also for presenting the Best Paper Awards for the top 3 papers presented at this conference. I'm sure the awardees were overwhelmed receiving the awards from someone as illustrious as Dr. Subbarao. We would like to extend our heartfelt thanks to Dr. Josna Bapat, spouse of Dr. Subir Gokarn, and the Gokarn family for sponsoring the Best Paper Awards in Dr. Gokarn's honor. Dr. Bapat has been a guiding force behind the institution of the awards, and it is a great honor for IGIDR that the awards were presented as part of the Macroeconomics and Finance Conference. Our sincere gratitude also to Mr. Gopal Srinivasan, Chairman and Managing Director of TVS Capital Funds Limited, for co-sponsoring this paper. The prestige that is associated with the Dr. Subir Gokarn Best Paper Awards is reflected in the constitution of the awards committee, consisting of distinguished academicians in the areas of macroeconomics and finance, namely Professor Chetan Ghatia of Indian Statistical Institute, Delhi, and Professor Sushanta Malik of Queen Mary University of London. Both of them are stalwarts in their respective fields, and we are deeply honored that they had accepted our invitation to be members of the awards committee. We are deeply thankful to Professor Ghatia and Professor Malik for being an integral part of the awards adjudication process. They have spared their valuable time to sit through all the presentations and to evaluate the selected papers in various aspects. The launch of the IGIDR microsite dedicated to Dr. Gokarn's policy writings and work at IGIDR has been possible through the cooperative efforts of his friends and family and our team at IGIDR. The journey has been long but extremely exciting, and I hope our joint vision is reflected in the microsite. Our sincere thanks to Dr. Nalin Kishore, Dr. Nirmal Mohanty, Mr. Prabir Roy, Mr. Narendra Singh, and Dr. Josna Bapat, as well as my colleagues at IGIDR for their valuable contributions to this project. The quality of any conference hinges on the quality of the papers presented in the different sessions. I'm sure all of us will agree that each of the sessions is exciting and enriching in terms of the subjects covered and discussions that followed. We are extremely thankful to each presenter to be a valuable part of this conference, present their research with passion, take questions from the audience, and being totally immersed in the conference proceeding. Any conference session also critically hinges on the chairperson of the session. We were fortunate to have excellent chairpersons who enriched each session with their comments and observations, as well as conducted the session in a timely manner. We extend our sincere thanks to our esteemed chairpersons. The proceedings of each of our conference sessions, keynote speeches, and paper presentations were enriched by participation from the audience. We were overwhelmed with the wholehearted participation of a large number of audience members, and the time of the day really did not matter. One of our objectives was to give an experience as close as possible to in-person conference to all the attendees. Of course, we do recognize that is a tall order, but I hope that we have been able to create an interactive conference environment in a virtual space. It is now my pleasure and honor to thank, on behalf of the organizing committee, the individual at the helm of the 19th Macroeconomics and Finance Conference 2021, Professor S. Mahendra Dev, our esteemed Director and Vice Chancellor. We cannot thank him enough for inspiring us in organizing a high-quality conference and for encouraging us to reach out to researchers in macroeconomics and finance far and wide. Any virtual conference in the scale at which this conference has been organized is totally dependent on information technology. That this conference could be smoothly and successfully conducted without any technical glitches whatsoever, fingers crossed as I present my vote of thanks, is completely due to the diligent and round-the-clock planning, execution, and monitoring by our in-house IT team headed by Mr. Lingaraj Panda and his team. A very big thank you to you, Lingaraj, who is here, for being such a constant support. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank our enthusiastic and technically savvy student volunteers, Tanu Gupta, Abhishek Dureja, and Hardeep Singh, who took time from their PhD submission work to help us round the clock. I also take this opportunity to thank another very important individual, Mr. Jai Mohan Pandit, our registrar, and his team, particularly Mr. Samir Parab, our administrative officer, our chief librarian, Mr. Shama Prasad Pujar, and also the accounts department, who have been of immense help at all administrative levels during this conference organization. I also want to thank the people who always remain behind the scenes, but without whose contribution this conference would not have been possible. And by that I mean our excellent ground support team. The MFC organizing committee would not have been able to pull off this feat without the relentless help and effort of our conference secretariat, consisting of Ms. Martha Lobo, and also our communications officer, Ms. Sneha Singh, and administrative staff member, Tanmay Joshi. Last but not the least, how can I not thank my dear and esteemed colleagues in the MFC organization committee? Tanya Ghosh, Sargam Gupta, Rajendra Vaidya, and Rajeshwari Sengupta for their tremendous energy and effort and constantly helping me with their ideas and visions about making this a great conference. A special shout out to Professor Ganesh Kumar and Subrata Sarkar as well for their valuable contribution in creating the microsite of Dr. Subir Gokarn. I want to end this vote of thanks by extending my heartfelt gratitude to all my fellow colleagues of IGIDR who have enriched our organization process with their valuable inputs. Thank you once again for being such a wonderful audience for this MFC, and we look forward to seeing you again in the December of 2023, hopefully in person. Good night.